today we are going over our programming stuff. So let's get to it. So programming Pilates classes, right? It's the way you arrange your class. Before I even get there, sorry, I didn't even say. So if you do have any questions throughout this whole thing, or like, just feel free to stop me, feel free to chime in and ask your questions. And we'll, of course, circle back at the end and you can ask questions then as well. So feel free to unmute yourself or put something in the chat as well. I'll try to keep an eye on it. It's a little hard to keep an eye on the chat sometimes around here. Let's see if I can bring it up and like make it tiny in the corner. I wish they would like have a little make it super tiny thing, but I will do my best to try to keep an eye on that though. All right, so back at it. And so programming, right? Programming our Pilates classes, the way you arrange your class, right? It can be based on many different things, like on different concepts, body parts, all kinds of things that it can be based on. So when we're going into it, it's always good to have that idea, right, of what it's going to be based on so that you can arrange your class around whatever concept or idea that you're trying to present to your students, of course. And it also helps with like getting rid of like the monotony, so that as a teacher, sometimes we get bored of teaching the same thing over and over. So we start to like mix it up a lot. So this programming is a way so that you can like squash that monotony, not just for yourself, but for your students, right? Because I know there's definitely, for me, with the different programming I probably have like maybe like 10 different ones that, and there might be more, but they all mix and match and come in together so that like I can pull from this one or that one and they all like end up coming together. So it kind of helps keep things going, but like you get really good at teaching those specific things, like our segments that you have, then it makes things seem a little more seamless, right? So let me just go to our next slide. All right, so things to think about when it comes to programming, right? So you need to be able to define the purpose of your class. Like that's number one. If you don't have a purpose or a goal for your class or your clients, then everything just kind of falls apart, and it really just is fitness. Like they really are just kind of going through the motions of exercises more so than getting the concepts behind and the why behind the exercise so that they can understand it on a deeper level and move deeper into their practice. Right. And then the other part is knowing how long the class is, depending on your client or depending on your format. You know, it could be 15-minute class, or shoot, it could be a 5-minute class if you're just recording videos, right? So it could be 15 minutes, could be 30 minutes, it could be 50 minutes or an hour, right? So depending on where you're working, some studios are 50 minutes, some studios have 60-minute classes. So you just want to know how much time you have to allot to each segment that you will end up choosing for your class. Right. And then the next thought on that is what is the ability level of the participants of your class, right? So you want to make sure it's appropriate so that your students are challenged appropriately, but not over challenged to the point where nobody can do anything. So you definitely want to choose that. And then the next part, and this kind of bleed together, is using progressions when you are teaching. Whether you're teaching beginners or you're teaching advanced people, progressions come in handy big time to be able to take somebody through the beginning level all the way to the advanced, right? And then the next part is like moving the body in all planes of motion, right? That it moves. Then that means that you're going to get every muscle to work in the body if you move the joints in all the planes of motion that they are able to move. Okay, so keeping that. So that always gives you something to think about when you're teaching. And then you want to know if each exercise flows to the next, right? So to make it feel seamless, and like by the time you get to the end of the class, you're like, I can't believe it's done, because everything just went together. It wasn't like disjoint and like you're pausing in between each exercise, or you're having to like wait a second because you can't remember what's coming next, right? So it makes it easier and for everybody in the class to move freely through the class, right?
Hey, Lincola?
Yeah.
I have a question on that one,
Yeah.
that last slide.
Okay.
So really quick, for number one, defining the purpose, can you give an example of one? So I know typically some instructors start off and say, what is it that you want to accomplish? But I think sometimes I get a little confused by like
Right.
the
Yep.
purpose and
That's
the
actually
goal.
my next slide.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Then you can wait till then.
Right. So, what is the purpose and the goal, right, of your workout? Like, here's some examples, right? So, maybe you're building pelvic awareness, like on how to stabilize the pelvis or how to mobilize the pelvis, right, throughout the class. So, like within every single exercise, you are trying to bring attention to that in the class. Like, you could literally go through all 34 exercises in the mat flow and every single exercise talk about the pelvic component within within the whole thing. So it's like the same class, but it gives them a whole different perspective when they're moving through each exercise. Right. So another one is like maybe they're looking to gain upper body strength for planks or something. So that's their target. They want to be able to do planks really, really well. So all of your programming is going to be geared towards that, geared towards their shoulder mobility, their shoulder strength, stability, and like the core stability on being able to hold, because like it's one of the biggest components of planks, they have to have trunk stability as they're moving their arms, right? So everything else is stable except for those shoulders and arms during that. So you're trying to create your program that's going to warm them up and talk about the concepts needed to be able to do a really good plank, right? So another, say, breaking down teaser. So coming into all those little components of teaser, they got to be able to do a roll up, right? They need to be able to stabilize and mobilize their pelvis. They need to be able to find balance points. So there's a lot of little components within teaser that you can have as the beginning part of your class and work them up to being able to do that teaser exercise, right? Or at least learning the components that are necessary. So, and then as the teacher, when you see them going through the breakdown of the exercise, then that lets you know where they're probably going to be able to finish, right? Are they going to be able to do teaser? Because maybe if they can't even do balance point, then you're going to stop there and maybe work on the concepts of being able to get to balance point, right? So priming the body, say for standing balance work is another example, like building awareness of the shoulder girdle, right? Progress towards roll up. So being able to do that full roll up on the mat with the straight legs all the way out, arms next to the ears, right? So you're working to be able to get that, right? So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, yeah, it did. It did.
Okay,
Thank
good,
you.
good. Yeah, you're welcome. All right. So before my class, right? So it's always best to show up at least 15 minutes early. So we're going to talk about a little bit about this teaching part and like just taking it through that process of being a teacher, showing up, and how that your thought process of how you're going to get your students to be where you want them to be and like the exercises and like going through the whole process, right? So showing up 15 minutes early from class for class as a teacher gives you a moment to like settle into the space, kind of think about what your body needs that day, as well as what you want to teach that day, because it is a kind of a part of, because if you got to think, you as a teacher, you have to demonstrate, right? And so if your body's not ready to do something or you're not feeling it that day, then you might not teach it if that's something that you have to demonstrate. Like if you're choosing, let's say, control balance or like some super hard exercise, and you're like, I don't know if I'm ready for that today. So let's maybe focus on something else, right? So that helps you, like once you get into that space, to get your body moving to fill out things and what you should do, as well as set up other things, right? So you're being able to set up your music, you're setting up your, mats, whatever equipment, all that good stuff, right? So at this point, right, this is a great time once you get there. Clients are probably going to start coming in if you're in person, or if you're doing online, then maybe you're starting your class like 5 minutes or so early. So people are going to start coming into class. You're going to be admitting them, checking them in, all that good stuff, right? And asking them how they feel, what they need for that time, right? And you're going to be kind of establishing what you're going to be teaching with your students so that you can prepare them mentally for the challenge that's ahead of them, right? And telling them this on a psychological standpoint really does make students perform better if you tell them what to expect before class, right? Now, and then this is also the time where you're going to tell them what they need to get for whatever props, if you're using those during your class. Right. And then this is also the time at the beginning of the class is when you're thinking about how you're finishing your class, right? So all those things that you need to remember to do at the end of class, not just clean up your space, right? But you also want to thank your students, ask for feedback, right? And, thank them for coming, honoring themselves and their practice, right? And then letting them know if you have any specials or upcoming classes or events or social media, whatever is going on that you want to share with them. And this is the time to really think about it so that it gets in your brain so that you can remember at the end of class to say these things, right? All right. Now, let's go to the next one. Let me move my thing because I am in the way over here. There we go. All right. So now after all this, you're thinking about your class, right? And you need to be able to set the pace, like set the tone for your class. Like, what is it going to be like, right? Are you going to have a slow class, a moderate pace class, fast class, a high low setting like for the class? So you really are thinking about those things on the pace, on what you want to do for the students that day. And especially if they're beginning students, then you're probably not going to be moving at like a super fast pace, right? Because they haven't established like all of the things that they need to establish here. Now, this one here is next is like incorporating things into class. So this is also your thought about like, how am I going to add interest into my class today? Is it going to be just the straight exercise? Am I going to make them do pulses, holds, multiple sets of things, full range of motions, half range of motions, just to like change things up? Right. Because like when you think about your class, like this, just touching back on the multiple sets, like you don't have to just give them one try. It's up to you. You're the teacher. You can teach however you want. If you want to give them a double shot at each exercise, you can, right? It just depends on the format and how you're setting up your class, right? And one thing about the pace and the tone of the class, it heavily relies on you as a teacher and your voice, right? The intonations, your pauses, your inflections, how quickly you're talking, how slowly you're talking, right? How like you lift your voice and like, or give emphasis on certain things. That is what is going to set this pace for your class and give your students a good experience, right? And music also can change your class heavily. Like if you're trying to have like a kind of a chill, stretchy class, you're not going to want to have really fast music because then the students are going to be all pumped up. So I've noticed like, when I'm teaching and I want to teach somebody a concept and like teach them something new, like if I put pop music on, it is almost impossible to get them to focus. Like they just want to move and jam it out. And like, it's like they're in the gym, right? They're going hard and you want them to slow down. So it's like at that point, you're like, okay, maybe this wasn't the best playlist to choose because, my students are just kind of all over the place, right? They're going with the pace of the music instead of the pace of my voice, right? So you don't want to be in competition with that. All right. Now, next part, we've been talking about progressions a little bit, right? And just to really say what a progression is, right? It helps you, it creates a brain map, right? So it's a way to break down exercises into their smaller components, right? It gives your students a roadmap and multiple tries to achieve an exercise. And they also get to choose like their desired level. So like say on a day, like you're like, okay, well, I can only do a chest lift today. I can't do a full roll up today. Then maybe they're going to stay at doing the chest lift that day. And that is perfectly fine because, maybe that's something they really need to work on. If they're not able to get up into that full roll up, they can choose to stay at that chest lift place, right? So it's let, and then everybody in the class can choose where they want to be, and you don't have to worry about breaking down levels for those students because you've already given it to them, right? And they can stay to where they are, so you can have a class full of multiple different levels of students, and who knows, maybe that advanced person just wants to do a chest lift that day. They might, so that's okay, right? You don't always have to do the advanced variation, right? So this makes it easier for you to teach, right? A new skill for somebody because they stop at where they are capable, and then maybe they will try to push beyond, and or they get to see the other students in class go to that higher level so they can see where they can go eventually, like once they've gotten stronger, or like that skill has been nailed into their brain, or their body rather. Right. Now, so just coming here, just thinking about skill building, because we were just talking about that, and we're creating a skill building class, right? With using progressions, right? So it primes your students to learn new exercises by taking them through the fundamentals required for the target exercise, right? And then, so don't pay attention so much to the percentages and everything here, that more so than when you're always got to warm them up, right? And then you're going to teach them those foundations. Warm up is the great place to teach foundations of different exercises. Like we all know that you need to be able to do a chest lift before you can do a roll up. So you're going to be maybe teaching them that, or you're teaching them some bridging, right? As a foundational exercise that helps show them how they can articulate their spine, which is something that's necessary for, say, roll up, right? So you're progressing them upwards into that exercise, if that full exercise is roll up during that time. So maybe you're giving them props to help them through it, to give them some different things that they can do to be able to get to that target exercise. And then once they get there, of course, you're going to like warm down and maybe have some like gentle stretching, articulations, whatever you choose during that time, right, for building those skills. So the class kind of peaks. You're going through all of the little skills. I wouldn't even say peaks more towards the end. So it's kind of a steady, gradual upwards for it, because your target exercise is like that pinnacle part of it, right? So you're working all of this up, all these different foundations to get to that target exercise, and then they get to give it a shot to see if they can do that target exercise. And the great thing about the progression is their body is so primed, the muscles are turned on, their skills are there, right? You can't strengthen a skill you don't have, so you're really priming those muscles, which is essentially creating a skill within their body, their brain map, and then they're able to do that target exercise because everything's turned on. All right. Next is just getting them moving, right? So there's a lot to think about getting them moving, because we're still at that beginning stage of like, how are we going to plan this class? And this comes really quick for Pilates instructors, but this is also where self-practice comes into play, to be able to think about how you're going to get these students moving and on this mat, right? So as we've talked about before, first, of course, you want to set the mood, right? And that's your music, your lighting, your pace, you're thinking about your tone of voice. We already talked about that, right? That's one of the first things you're going to be thinking about. And then your starting position. Where are they going to start? They're going to be standing, seated, lying down, sideline, kneeling. How are they going to be, right? On the mat to start with their first exercise, right? And then this is where you get to move into warming them up. How are you going to warm them up? Are you going to warm them up pre-Pilates? Maybe you're just going to pick an exercise and go hard and right at it with the hundreds, or you're going to start them off with some gentle movements like roll downs, or not roll downs, excuse me, but stacking the spine, some different articulations, that kind of stuff. Or maybe they're just, like I said, they're going to jam it into it and like really start moving, right? So it's just really thinking about how they're going to be moving. So like if you chose fast music, then maybe they're going to be starting off at not necessarily a faster pace, but they're probably not necessarily starting off at pre-Pilates. But who knows? It really depends on your crowd and your students. Maybe those pre-Pilates people just getting started need some really like strong motivational music and good, high voice, not high, but like high pitched voice, but like just like a voice with a lot of emphasis, a lot of motivation. Who knows, right? Just depends on your crowd. And I definitely have had some students who prefer a more relaxed, gentle start, right? They need a little more calm. And some students don't want music, or maybe they just want like classical music. So it really just depends on your crowd, right? On how you're going to get them started and how you're going to get them moving and set that mood for them, right? And so this is still talking about our warm up, right? Warm up is like a really crucial part to fitness, because if there's not a good warm up, then this is where injuries start to happen, or students are just not able to push harder in their exercises if they're not warmed up well enough, right? So you're thinking about your warm up, right? Depends on the focus of your class, of course. And we'll start talking about focuses, different types of focuses in a moment for each class. But you're going to be working to hit all planes of motions during classes, right? And then you're thinking about with that warm up, what's the intensity? How complex is it? How much endurance do they need to have to get through this? How much actual movement are they doing, right? Because they could just be doing holds this whole time. And then how are you going to help them recover so that they can move into their next exercise? And you think about all of these things. This is something, this cycle goes over and over again, right? So, okay, like, so like, okay, how intense is this next exercise? Like, we all know, like, certain exercises are way more intense, way more complex than others. So each exercise has this component within it. Like, how am I going to get them? Like, okay, so let's think a really intense exercise. Somebody give me a good example of one that's really intense for you when you do it. You can feel free to put in the chat too. You don't have to blurt it out. Just want to give an example and rather use an example of an exercise that you find intense. So it kind of gives you a little more relevant information about an intense exercise.
Maybe the jackknife mixed with like
Jack.
the corkscrew. Yeah.
Okay, jackknife with so the corkscrew, the fully advanced version of
Yeah.
corkscrew with the jackknife. Yes,
Or
that
just
is
a
like
jackknife.
they're both like super intense, right? So, but yes, this like corkscrew with the jackknife, like that is like that would be like up. I guess like if you're thinking of percentages, that's like 110% challenging exercise, and it is complicated, right? Because they need to be able to articulate their spine and rotate all at the same time, going up and going down like one side. So they have to have a really high level of awareness to be able to even do that exercise. So like breaking down all those little components on them being able to do the rollover right before that. So like the complexity of getting to that exercise, there's a lot of warming up that has to happen. So you're going to want to start them off and all those different planes of motion, so because you know that this exercise requires that. I mean, it is a heavily flexed exercise, right? Using flexion during the exercise of the spine. But so you definitely want to make sure you get a decent amount of warm up for those. So breaking down all of those complex movements to do the full jackknife and or corkscrew on the way down, if you're choosing to do that, then you know that that's super intense. It's super complex. It requires a lot of endurance, a lot of arm strength, like tricep strength to be able to get hold up and levitate in that exercise. And there's a lot of different movements in it, right? And knowing that that movement is flexion, as we already just talked about, then you're going to make sure you incorporate those things. And then how is your student going to recover after that exercise? It's a lot of abdominal work, a lot of arm work. Like, where are you going to take them after doing that corkscrew? If you're, wanting to stick on the traditional side, or if you're wanting to have them get off their back since they were just an inversion, right? So you might have them like turn to their side after that versus sitting up all the way, right? And maybe they get a head rush coming into after that, right? So it's like thinking about all those things that before and that and after for that exercise, right? And the thought process of what do I need to do to warm up for that? Okay. So then there's other part of thinking about warm up, as we talked about some, is talking about the different types of the body, right? So you utilize different planes of motion to warm up the body and the different concepts to warm up the body. So this is a cycle that is going to happen multiple times throughout your class, but in particular, warming up, we start in a stable place, right? And yes, there's always different ways to warm up and different nuance to stuff. But a lot of times when you're teaching somebody, you start finding stability, right? Especially in Pilates, we work on finding that pelvic stability, spinal stability, and knowing that they can keep it stable and do arm exercises or leg exercises and different limb exercises to challenge their core stability. And then moving into some mobility, so starting to mobilize the spine, right? So typically when they're mobilizing the spine, they start to move in the sagittal plane, so that forward plane first, before we go into the hyperextension or go into the hyperextension phase. But you are going to that forward plane and you're extending the spine to neutral generally. And then we start maybe with some side to side work, and then moving into some multiplanar work where you're moving in all three planes of motion, right? I should probably put my little screen back up of myself because I'm moving over here and I know nobody can see me. So on the recording, they'll be like, she's talking and I'm like moving and like nobody can see me moving. All right. So that's, just thinking about, yes, you got all those planes of motion that you're trying to hit for the students here. All right, let me go to the next one. Right. So I find that there are several different ways to think about how you're going to get a student to move in all those different planes of motions, right? So, and I say here, you want to pick a format so it's easiest for you to remember. So I'm about to show you like just that there's a few different ways to think about how you're going to remember that you move that person's body in all planes of motion, right? We always know there's going to be a warm up, there's going to be a warm down, right? So one way to think about, okay, maybe it's I'm going to do upper body, lower body, full body, right? So if you're working the upper body, right, lower body, full body, you're still going to try to get these people in all planes of motion. But this is how you can think about your class. Okay, I worked all of the upper body, I worked all of the lower body. Now I got to do the full body, and we're going to do some exercises where the whole body's moving at once. Right, so everything is kind of mobilized and doing something. Like say an example would be them doing the side bend or like the twist where you like reach you're in the side lying side bend position and you twist, pike the hips up and twist and reach through. So that is an example of you're moving every part of your body at that time, right? So you're just wanting to make sure they get through all that. And then you're also thinking about like the different planes of motion, as I said before. So, well, you can think about it as, okay, I got rotation in, and rotation can be of joints as well as spine, right? So you're thinking of all those, the ball and socket joints, they need rotation, right? The spine can rotate. So you're thinking about all of that. Then, okay, I moved those. I did rotation. There's side lying work. So that's that frontal plane where you're going side to side. And then the sagittal plane. So the sagittal plane going forward as well as going back, right, into that hyperextension, you want to be able to move in the sagittal plane. And the same for the prone work. Typically, a lot of the prone work is like planking type stuff, or it's going to be stuff in the hyperextension, right? If you're on your stomach, typically the only place you got to go is back, right, for the spine. And then kneeling, right? So it typically is going to be more in the sagittal plane for kneeling work, right? So that forward and back plane. And you can get some out leg movement out to the sides, a little circumduction of the and rotation as well in that kneeling position too. So you're thinking about, okay, those you want to make sure you hit all of those. And typically if you've hit all of those in the different segments, the upper body, the lower body, right, that side body, you've gotten everything, right? All right, and then the next, right, I just talked about, right, there's another way to think about it on, did I get every part of that body, right? So yeah, I'll always warm up right, warm down, of course, but in the class, front body, side body, back body, right? So I'm thinking, okay, I work, and when you think about the body, I'm saying front body, your primary moving muscles are front body muscles, right? So, or back body muscles, right? I'm using all the muscles in the back side of my body, my back muscles, my glutes, my hamstrings, right? Calves, that kind of stuff. So you're noting that, okay, yes, I got all those. And then I got all those side body things. And typically you're going to be, getting most of your planes of motion that way. Of course, you have to remember that rotation, right? So that would be the one that would be left out. But other than that, you're still getting, that side body really is rotation when you think about it for the obliques and getting into some of those exercises, like even, lats, although there's back body muscles do help with rotation as well as front body muscles, right? Now from here, we're just going to start, before I go to the next section, which is going to talk more about the different focuses that you can have for a class, then do you have any questions or anything about any of the previous stuff that we just talked about? I'll give you a second to unmute if you need to. All right. So let's move on to the next part then. So the next part is right, lengthening. The one focus that you can have on a class is lengthening and strengthening. So it kind of, this is where I talked before about having a high-low kind of class, right? So you can have a component, of course, we always have that warm up, right? Maybe they're starting off with a little bit of stretching because you always want to be warmed up before you stretch, right? Stretching and lengthening type things. And that, you think about you having your focus, as we talked about before, like if you have a focus within all of this, yes, it's lengthening and strengthening. So everything within the exercise that you choose, it doesn't matter what exercise you choose, you can apply this to it. Like, okay, where are you finding the length in this exercise? Because we know just about every Pilates exercise has some kind of lengthening component to it, some kind of stretchy type of component to it. So you're bringing that into focus. Like say for bridging is tractioning the spine. So the more they reach those sit bones towards their heels and like their knees are feel like they're pushing past their toes, the more traction they're creating and stretch and lengthening in their spine in that exercise, right? So then we're working, get into the strength. So say continuing to use bridge as an example, right? You worked on creating that long line of length during their bridge, and now you got them in their bridge. Let's do some work, right? They're there. Let's do some hip lifts, or let's do some pulses, leg lifts, different things that you can add into that, right? So then you would take them back down and let's go back into some stretching. So you're down on your back still. There's lots of options you can do for stretching here with that on your back. And maybe they're pulling a knee to their chest and having one leg along on the ground and stretching those hip flexors as well, right? And then maybe they're going back into some work. Oh, they could go right back into some work and do maybe some single leg stretch since they're already there, right? And then you would do that over and over during the class. So there's a stretchy component, then there's a work warm up component, and then strengthen type component. And you just go back into the stretching, which is actually a really nice class, right? So it happens over and over until you get to the end of the class to that warm down place. So, this is a good place to put this though. But just talking about transitions, because I just talking about the bridge and how you're going to get them from the length and the strength. So the bridging place, they got into their hips are up. Now they're doing maybe the shoulder bridge with the leg lower and lift. And then they're going into stretching that hip. And then they go right into doing some single leg stretch. So this is picking up, like creating those seamless transitions between those exercises, right? So you can always pick up where the last exercise left off. They were doing the hip flexor stretch, having one knee pulled to the chest, another leg straight. All they got to do is pop that straight leg up off the floor, do a chest lift, and they're ready to start switching those knees for that single leg stretch. So they're just picking up right where they left off. So it makes it feel really seamless to go from one exercise to the next. And if you do look at the Pilates series, like with the fives, for instance, right? So single leg stretch or double leg stretch. You got your double leg lower lift, your crisscross, and single leg stretch, double leg stretch, scissors, legs going straight, legs scissors going up and down, and then you can do your double leg lower lift and maybe your crisscross, right? So they all really do lead into each other for that. So that's a really good series. And then you can maybe just work one side for this. You're thinking about, I'm just going to do all these exercises. Like, let's say they're doing their bridges. You're going to just work on that right leg, do some stuff there. Maybe they roll on their side, do some side kicks with that one right leg. Maybe they roll back to their back and start doing something else with that leg. And then you would get the other leg, roll to the side and do maybe your side kicks on that one side. So just having them kind of move within that one side of their body, and then going to the other side is one way to create transitions. And then others, you can go around the world, right? So working all sides of the body. So same kind of thought process on doing the bridging and into the sideline work, right? So having that If you were not just doing one side, maybe you did the one leg, the side kicks, turned onto the stomach, did some swimming, turned back to the other side, did some side kicks, and then turned back on your back and did bridging with the other leg. So you went all the way around the whole body, and they rolled all the way around on the whole mat for that exercise. If you're, that's just an example of something if they were lying straight down on the floor. And of course, you can do that in the kneeling position. You can do that in like that quadruped, kind of moving from quadruped to kneeling, right, type stuff as well. So it goes, just depends on which position they are in, right? If they're standing, you can totally work all the way around the whole body if they're standing, right? And then you can move through the different kinetic chains and joints. So maybe you're starting at the feet, starting your workout with footwork. So you're starting with some toes and feet, ankles, and maybe working up to doing some, like through the knees and the hips and the legs, right? So you're just working your way up. You start working with core, pelvic floor, abdominals. Maybe they're getting into the arm work, and then they start getting into like doing chest lifts and working, getting up into the upper body. So you're just working through the different kinetic chains in the body to help create just some flow, right? Transition so that they're working their way up or down or side to side, whichever you choose, right? So lots to think about. All right, so we're getting towards the end here. All right, so we're thinking about motivating and encouraging your students. So no matter which thing you choose for your students on how you want your class, it could be like totally disjointed, totally crazy class. But if you don't motivate them, encourage them, they're not going to want to move forward, right? And motivation is really comes from your voice and how you prepare your students for the challenging segment that's coming up, right? Their workout. Right, so you can use your voice to add emphasis, momentum, right, to amplify the energy, and so that they can endure through that exercise and keep going, right? So you really want to use your voice to motivate, not and encourage, right, using those positive words to help them through the workout and remind them of all the hard work that they're putting in, and just like giving like one more try, right? So you're actually giving them some motivation and encouragement throughout this things, no matter what exercise you choose or how your format comes out. You really want to make sure you give them that, and that'll keep them coming back more so than, because they don't care necessarily about your how well you are able to put exercises together. Don't get me wrong, they do want to have a good workout, and students do love it when it feels more seamless. But if you're like just going through the motions of the exercise and not actually helping like encourage them and giving the like using your energy to help pump them up to keep them going or calm them down if they need to be calmed down, then they're not going to probably want to come back, right? Right. And then there's the next part. One of the most important parts, I think, is, but it tends to develop more as you've been teaching longer. The more you get into the work, the more self-practice, practice teaching, all of that good stuff, observation that you do is connecting, right? So you need to, the Pilates is a system. So that's across all pieces of equipment, not just the mat work, right? And the mat in itself has its own system, but all of the different apparatus work together, right? And knowing all of the benefits for the exercises, the purpose for your purpose for choosing an exercise can reach your students on a much deeper level. The more you know, the more you practice, the easier that becomes to be able to connect the why back, right? So the reason why we're doing this, say, because we were talking about planks earlier, right? Being able to, having one of our focuses be being able to do a really good plank or push up, right? So you bringing into like them doing shoulder isolations, like rib cage control, and all of those different pre-Pilates exercises are going to you're going to connect that to them being able to move their shoulders and maintain stability and do that push-up. So like all of those exercises that you chose in the beginning, you're choosing them for a reason, because your ultimate goal is for them to be able to do a really strong push-up. So you need to give them awareness to their shoulders in order for them to be able to accomplish that, right? So the next part is performance, right? Every class is essentially a performance, right? You're on when you get there, when people show up, you're on, and you're really that person that sets the mood, sets the pace, like the tone for the class. And you definitely want to show up for that, right? So it's a performance for you and your students, right? Physically and mentally for both of you, because you have to be prepared to demonstrate, right? And or have a capable student demonstrate a new exercise or that you're trying to show your students, right? Because sometimes they need to see it before see it performed before they're able to do it. So you definitely want to make sure you always show up to class being ready to perform, especially if something starts to turn into a hot mess. Then maybe that there's that a disconnect between the cueing, so that the things start to kind of fall apart. So sometimes it's just easier to show, right? If you can't get the words out, you got to be able to perform it, right? So that comes back into the own personal practice, and or at least just taking all the other students out of it, and the one student that is capable, just say, hey, I'm going to spotlight them. Let's just have so and so do it today, right? And now we're all going to do it together. All right. And that's really it. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for coming. And we're just going to go into a little Q&A now. So if you have some questions about anything, or need me to explain something a little better, or just give an example of an exercise, feel free.
So I have a question. So in regards to, for example, like the warm up, are you saying that it's, I know you showed a lot of slides on like warm up and getting everybody
Yes.
prepared for the goal of the class. So is there a chance that you determine like multiple goals that you have for the class, or like, for example, certain moves that use like the same thing, same type of I guess areas, motions in the
Mm-hmm.
body? Like, do you just kind of fit all of that into the warm up at the beginning, or is it more advised to do that?
No, no, no. You can, so the warm up is not, I mean, you can do skill building in warm up, or more or less bringing attention to different movements and what they're doing. But, because like if they don't know what exercise that they're like the goal target exercise is, then if they've never done it before, like if this is something you get programming that you thought up on your own, like I really want my students to be able to do the teaser today, right? So they don't know what the exercise is. So your goal really is just to include those in the programming, and just like to build awareness and stay and bring attention to the movement that they're doing, so that thinking about how deep they might need to go, or deeper in whatever exercise, or just they need their attention to it, because the students are going to, their bodies are going to tell you what they can do, right? So there's also that component, which I didn't mention earlier, but their bodies are going to tell you what they can and can't do. So that in turn is going to give you feedback on, okay, well, we need to go over this concept before they can even get to that other one that I was going to try to get them to do. So like your whole class, you might come to it with a plan about what you're going to do and teach and what warm up you're going to have. But once they start moving, that's when your plan really kicks into action, because you're going to have to be malleable and change things for the student during that time. And like, if they maybe that day they're like, oh, I got some stomach issues, like I can't do sit-ups, like today, like after my celiac issues, like there's no way I can do sit-ups. So, they're gonna be like, okay, well, my whole plan went out the window because we're not gonna be doing any roll-ups today, right? So like being able to kind of transition, and that's also one reason why I really stress always talking to your students before class, because your plan might always go out the window. But just kind of circle back to the what you're picking for your warm up, just should relate to your programming and what you're going to do, right? Like
Okay.
on getting them moving in certain ways. And even in the warm up, you're still trying to get them to move in all planes of motion, right? In a easy, not necessarily easy, but in an attainable way, right? Within the warm up. So not saying I'm not going to go and pick up 100 pounds for a warm up. I'm probably going to start off with like a lighter weight to get my muscles warmed up, right? Like maybe 5 pounds or 10 pounds to get started versus going straight for that 100 pounds as my warm up. So you're just like get gentler, more attainable movements to get the muscle primed in the warm up. And then you start moving into the more challenging, more complex movements. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, it does.
Good, good. Anything else? Any questions for you, Crystal?
No, for me, it's just remembering like
Right.
my routine. That's what I have, and I probably have a cheat sheet for a while until I
hmm
have some type of routine.
Right, and coming up with those, the ones that you can remember. And that to when it comes to that, for me, like it really does come down to the self-practice component of it and like practicing what you're going to teach so
Mm,
that like it gets into your muscle memory. So
right,
that like it kind of starts to feel a little more seamless at that time. And I think, there's definitely a saying in Pilates of like, that some programs and teachers just live by is that like if I can't do it then I can't teach it, which I don't think is necessarily the case, but because you don't have it in your body, right? So it's harder for you to pull it out
right,
if you can't do it, and or remember that that's supposed to come next. And that's not always necessarily the case. Like, you remember you got your cheat sheet, then you obviously can teach it and do it. But that definitely with self practice, like bringing it in as much, even if you can't physically do it in your self practice, that particular component of your workout, you can just talk it out, like say it as if you were teaching it, and going through it. And that's totally what sometimes myself practice. I'll like be sitting on the mat, but like I don't really feel like doing this exercise today, so I'll just be laying on the mat and I'll just talk. Right? I'll just talk. Okay, this is no, lift your hands, right? They would lift their leg. They would do it this, go move it right, move it left, right? So I'm just talking. It looks like I'm talking to myself, but you're still but you still get to get the memory, right? Because you're talking, your mouth is moving, your brain is still going through the process of the exercise, even though you're not actually physically performing it. So that I think helps a lot, even if it's just you have your exercise list in front of you,
right.
and just talk it out. Like just sit there and talk, right? I mean, it might sound stupid, or you might feel stupid or embarrassed or like a little weird, especially if there's other people around.
Right.
But it does, I find that does help me too, because I do that as well. Just going through my list on like, okay, you're gonna lift it up. Or like if it's a timed class, like, sometimes I'm like snapping my finger, like if it's a bar class, like I'm just like, okay, and lift and lift and lift. And now I'll go through the counts and 1, 2, 3, right? Going through the whole thing just with all of the counts, so that it gives me that muscle memory of the exercises and remembering it.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it'll come together. It's just a matter of me doing the self practice and then deciding on what are well, I know for to test out for your classes certain requirement, but I'm also looking at testing out for my Pilates, club Pilates teacher
Mm-hmm.
training too. That so looking at that, and one thing is good is I'll integrate the beginners uh, class for the mat part. That will help. So that's kind of reinforced because that was probably my weakest
Mm-hmm.
part
Mm-hmm.
of is the mat.
Yeah, yeah. And to be honest, that is fairly true for like Pilates in general, because everybody loves the equipment. And I have to say, one thing I do like about the whole COVID situation and being forced to go back to the mat, is that it has definitely strengthened that practice. And, it really is just repetition. It's just like learning a language. The more you do it, It just comes. It really does. Yeah. And even if it's just like here or there, you're like, okay, I'm gonna talk out this exercise, or just think about like the movement. So even if you're not talking, just like actually visualizing the movements or the muscles that are engaging during that time. Because I know for me, like there'll be that, like I'm even like as a teacher, like you're just talking, is right. You end up just talking as a teacher, especially if you have a really big class or if you're working at club Pilates, like you can't demonstrate, right? Because if all the reformers are taken, you you can't kick somebody off the reformer.
Right.
So you have the only it all is just talking. So that's one reason why I definitely put an emphasis on the more you can just talk it out, the easier it becomes for sure to just start. And you get in the flow. So it's good to do, things that you love to do too. That I think that makes it the easiest to remember when it's something that you really, the sequence you really like.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
right. And then something I also think about the classes as like these 15-minute, like, or less, like segments, like little chunks of whatever, like exercises flowing together. So like maybe I pick 4 different exercises or 5 different exercises, and it can be like I'd say maybe even 3. But if you're including like progressions within those exercises, and like giving them like the beginning, the intermediate, and advanced version of those 3 different exercises, right? And that little section right there, that's one segment, right? And you have 15 minutes of your class taken up just by 3 exercises with its progressions. So you
Okay.
don't have to overthink it. Of like, I think one thing I have to say that a lot of newer teachers will do is they'll because like we come from a foundation of 34 exercises, right? You can do all 34 exercises in 30 minutes if you really want to, right? Jam them out. So like thinking of like, okay, well that means I can do double in an hour, but you're if you wanted to, but that's a lot, all right? It's a lot of exercises. So especially for the beginning work, and if you're actually working with students, like a test out is a whole different subject, but when you're working with students, who knows, you might even only do 10 exercises in one class, but if you're doing the progressions with it, that fills up the whole hour in time, right? Because and then there's the recovery between each exercises that some students might need a little more recovery time in the beginning level for exercising, for sure. But yeah, and
Okay.
you can that in that little segment, right? Those 3 exercises that have their progressions. That little segment you can mix and match with different things, as okay, like I created like okay, and now I have like 5 warm-up segments that I like to do, right? And or how many ever warm-up segments you create. There's a warm-up section, then the section, other 15 minutes that comes right after your warm-up, right? Um, getting them like stabilizing, mobilizing, doing like different like exercises like that, like whether it's front body, back body, like feel okay, I got my 3 upper body segments, I got my 3 lower body segments, I got my 3 5 like side body segments that I like to do. So it's like just thinking about it. That's one reason why I did give you the different types of ways to think about it, so that you can create those little segments of the different front body, side body, or back body, types of segments, and you can create your classes around that. And you just have those little segments like, okay, I like this segment, I'm going to pull it in today. This one I'm going to pull in today, that you have. So it makes it a little more like bite-sized puzzle pieces that all come together for one full workout.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Interesting, because I've definitely noticed that in some of the observations I've watched, is that
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of times they've only worked on maybe no more than 5 different exercises, but a lot of the time was like progression. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Right. And you're still working though. I mean, because I mean
yeah,
that's where it starts to it's Pilates steps away from it just being exercises.
mhm,
Because you can totally just be like, okay, I'm gonna do triceps, I'm gonna do biceps, I'm gonna do like, arm raises, whatever. You can just do the exercises, but have no focus on why you're doing those exercises. But you're just doing it because I need to move my body, I gotta do it, get it over with, right? But when Pilates,
yeah,
starts to step into that, okay, well, we're progressing up to something and there's a purpose behind this movement. It's going to help you be better at this or that or whatever your goal in accomplishing is. So, but yes, it's so true. Like on getting like only a few exercises. You don't have to have a million exercises
Yeah.
to have an effective workout.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I've seen
Mm-hmm.
it, but it's worried me because I know eventually I got to get to the point where I go through the testing, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
well, how do I teach all these exercises in one class? I'm like, it doesn't look like it flows very good. It doesn't look like as much fun to throw every exercise in a class. Not to mention for me, a lot of the people that I will be practicing with has no idea what Pilates is. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
there's no way I'm going to throw all of those 34 exercises in a class and have to be able to even teach them like what half that stuff
Right.
is.
And there's that divergence between, right, the classical traditional Pilates where that's what they do every time, right? You go through the, well, maybe not the 34, depends on the level, but if you're in the full advanced, full class, you're going to do all 34 exercises in the order.
Yeah.
So, and that to me, that's one reason why I like going more towards the contemporary progressive side of Pilates, because you don't have to stick to that. Because I know and know that most people can't do all of those exercises, or it's going to take them a really long time to be able to do those exercises, such a long time that they're going to fall off and they're not going to continue their practice, right?
Yeah.
And that's, yeah, the biggest goal is for them to continue and to gain those skills versus just going through the motions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much, ladies. Any more questions or anything?
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so
Great.
much for